morning, everybody. This is Football Talk. I'm your host, Bo, and we are brought to you by El Cajon Peruvian restaurant down there in Pike Place Market. If you go in on Wednesday through Sunday from 4 to 9 p.m., mention the HawkTalk show, tell them Bo sent you, get 20% off your bill. So we got some good questions this week. Obviously, this is the HawkTalk segment, and we are going to get rolling. So there is... one of the things that I got asked because last week I said there was probably a small chance that Wagner comes back. And the reason for that was I just didn't think they'd be able to get it under the cap. But, he came on a pretty team-friendly deal, $5.5 million guaranteed. I think a 7.5 or 7.7, something like that was the incentive-based contract. I'm still not entirely sure how they got that under the cap, being as they were really close already, and they still have draft picks to bring in. So there clearly has to be something behind the scenes where they're either moving some guys or maybe there's some restructuring to some contracts. Something is definitely happening in the accounting room to make that work out. But it's great for the Hawks. It's great for Wagner. It's great for the city. So was I surprised they brought him back? No, I just didn't think that they were going to be able to afford it, but I knew they wanted him back. I knew he wanted to be back. And so the fact that they were able to get it together is obviously awesome. He put out it wasn't a post. I believe he was talking to the Times, Seattle Times. And he said that, he had made a lot of money through his career and just wanted to go and play where he was happy. He's happy with the Hawks and in the Northwest. So, as a Hawk fan and, the Seattle fan base, welcome back, Bobby Wagner. Awesome to have you there. And looking forward to that. That also adds some stability in, leadership on that defense. Also adds some stability there in, that linebacking core that was getting torched, most of the year. So great to have that leadership back in that unit. At the end of the day, he was the second overall linebacker, rated by Pro Football Focus. So it's not like he's had some huge falling off. He still makes a ton of plays. He's still, one of the most efficient tacklers in the league. So great asset to have back on the team. So awesome. In my mind, it's awesome to have him back, and it'll be interesting to see how they make the numbers actually work when it comes to, getting under the cap. Because as it sits right now, I think they're actually over the cap. So not sure how that works. I believe you are supposed to be under the cap by March 17th, but that always seems like kind of a pretend date because that is the beginning of free agency. So that doesn't really make any sense as far as guys you're going to sign or the draft or anything like that. So I imagine that is some juggling that they got to do along the way here. And, obviously they'll be able to get it done. The cap is somewhat of a fungible pretend number. The Rams showed that you can kick contracts down the road. Obviously it's hurting them now, but when you go all in for a ring and it works, it doesn't seem so dumb. But as it sits right now, man, the Rams are going to have a rough year. So I like that the Hawks don't generally take that approach. But so anyway, welcome back, Bobby Wagner. Okay, with the Rams rebuilding, Cards probably without Kyler Murray to start, and the Niners with Purdy recovering and splitting reps between Darnold and Lance, do I think the Hawks win the division? So I actually don't think the Hawks win the division. I do believe they're going to be a double-digit win team. I think the Niners are probably still the favorite to win the division. If this last season showed anything, it's that the rest of the team is good enough that it doesn't really matter who's under center. And so I feel like they're probably still the team to beat in the division. Could they do it? Sure. If I was placing a bet right now, I would bet the Niners are probably still the better team overall. But that is mostly just for this year. I think moving forward, probably not this coming season, but the following season, it'll probably be the Hawks division. But this coming year, I think it'll be a pretty hard fight. But I think the Niners are probably just a little bit better. That being said, there is a little bit of a question because obviously you don't know if Purdy is going to be recovered in time for the season. And if they're splitting number one reps, like Shanahan said, between Darnold and Lance, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. It kind of goes back to that old adage that if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have one. And in this case, I think that's really kind of what it is. I imagine that as they write out the depth chart, Lance is probably QB2 and Darnold is QB3. But when it comes to what it is, again, Shanahan was talking about, is they're going to share first team reps and kind of have a competition to see what it is. And obviously that makes a ton of sense because Lance just doesn't have a lot of playing time and, has a tendency to get hurt. Darnold does tend to be a little bit more durable. Obviously he doesn't have the upside that Lance has, but availability is huge. So that's one of those, you kind of have to do first team reps because you really don't know if Lance is going to be able to make it out of the first game. And you need a guy that has some continuity with the, all the number ones if, anything were to happen, especially because, again, at the end of the day, you really don't know what kind of recovery Purdy is going to have. Tommy John is not generally a football related injury. So seeing how he comes back from that will, that's a wait and see scenario. Do we trade Jamal Adams to try and get under the cap? Now that's interesting because I don't know that you really have much of a market for him. He's been hurt the last few years. I think it was a $13.5 million cap hit of dead cap. So wherever he would go, they'd have to pay a lot for a guy that hasn't been able to stay on the field. I really don't see anybody wanting to take that on, even as a trade, because you'd almost have to give him away for, a fifth or something, it would probably be like a fifth with a provisional fourth based on, production kind of thing. So I really don't think you can get off his contract this year. I think more or less he's a Seahawk for this coming season. And then there's the opt-out on his contract at the end of it. And I think that's probably where it is they'll have to assess. If he gets hurt again this year, I think they probably do end up, opting out or finding a way off the contract. But, again, that's one of those you're really not going to know until you're into the season. But near as I can tell, going into this year, he's going to be on the squad, and which is fine. Again, if he can stay healthy, that's awesome. The guy is a tremendous athlete. And if he can't, you were going to have to eat the contract anyway. And so hopefully they're moving some pieces around in a way that, it doesn't hurt the team so much. But you would have to see some pretty big things out of Jamal this coming season for them to not want to either opt out or do some sort of restructure moving forward. But, again, hopefully he stays healthy. Hopefully he can make a huge impact. Granted, he's not a great coverage safety, but that's not really the way they use him anyway. So all things considered, he's going to be a Seahawk this coming year. Do they go after Jalen Carter at 5? No, so I don't think so. I think after everything we saw, excuse me, after everything we saw at the pro day, I think he does slide. I don't think he slides as much as everybody thought that he would. And even I did. I thought maybe he was going to slide a little further than he would, or than he probably will. But I don't think he's going to be taken in, the top 5 or 6. I think he ends up falling probably somewhere in the 10 to 15 range. And I don't think that the Hawks will take the fifth overall pick to go get him. I still think that they're kind of in the market for a quarterback, but they may move up if he's still available and use that second pick that is currently number 20. But if they were to pair that with, one of their second round picks, something like that, they may be able to move up and go get him in that, 10 to 15 kind of area, which is probably about where I think he'll end up falling down to. But, we'll see. They've made some free agency moves along that defensive front. So they may be less inclined to take a number 1, a first round defensive end, defensive line guy when there is actually quite a bit of talent on that defensive line in the draft. And they do have 2 second round picks. So between that number 20 and a couple of second round picks, I think that they can round that out. Now, are they as high a level of talent as Will Anderson or, Jalen Carter? No, they're obviously not, but they're still top talent. And so I really think that they will probably, unless he falls down to him, I don't think they are going to do much, especially at the 5th spot. I think the 5th spot is really going to be reserved for picking up a quarterback. The only way I see that changing is if somebody were to trade with Arizona, because I think that they would have been targeting Will Anderson. So if somebody moves up into that 3rd spot and gets Arizona out of the way that needs a quarterback, I think that's about the only way that the Hawks end up going, going that route. But mostly because in that scenario, Will Anderson would be available. So really tough to say, but I don't think they take Carter at 5. So Frank Clark is still available. Do they try and go get him? I mean, it's a talented guy. It's interesting that he's not been picked up yet. That's another one where I just don't know how you make the numbers work. He will probably still want too much money, although, again, he's not on a team yet. Or if he is, I haven't seen the notification that he's been signed. But as far as I know, as we talk right now, I think he's still available. So if he's willing to take less, then they may figure out a way to bring him in. But I don't really see him doing that. And, that'll be one of those that'll probably be closer to the draft on, whether or not he's going to hang out and wait for top dollar, or if he's going to, entertain something less and go to a team that he wants to go to. But, that's a wait and see scenario. Why do I think Anthony Richards is a project, but I do think he's a good fit for the Hawks? Okay, so I think he's a project primarily because of his accuracy. And I put out a tweet yesterday that was a question on what's a player that you think could have had a better career if they would have held a clipboard for the first year. When I put that out, I put Ryan Leaf. I think he would have been better off to sit behind a high-level vet for a year and learn. And, that's some of the downfall to number 1, prospects, is they're going to a bad team. And so I think that's a kind of a scenario where AR-15 will probably have an issue. Like if he were to go, say, to the Texans and he's just thrown directly in, I think he'll struggle, right? Because if you already have accuracy issues, it's not going to get easier when you are on a bad team at the NFL level, right? You don't have the pieces around you. That's why you're picking 1 or 2. And you got the steep learning curve, and if you had accuracy issues in college, it's not going to immediately fix itself heading into the pros. Josh Allen was a prime example of that. It took him a couple of years to get that accuracy to become a little bit better. Now, AR-15 definitely has a huge upside on the athleticism end of it. So if he were to go to the Hawks, which is why I say he's a good fit there, he gets to sit behind a smart vet in Geno. And the Seahawks as an organization are really good at player development. And so I think that's a situation that would be really beneficial for him. He wouldn't be forced to play immediately. He'd have, great coaches around him, good, just player personnel. I think that it would be an ideal situation for a guy that isn't quite ready to go at the NFL level. Obviously, when you were watching the combine and the pro day, his athleticism jumps off the charts, and everybody was like, oh my God, he's probably going to go number one, which is insane to me, because if you watch actual game film, he's not ready to go. He's a little bit of a project, but I do think that he's a good fit for the Hawks solely because they are great at personnel development. And that's probably, kind of what it is he needs. So do I think they could pick him up at 5? I do. And do I think he'd be a good fit for the team? Absolutely, because he would be able to sit and, kind of learn, get accustomed to the speed of the game at the NFL level. I think that would be an ideal situation for him. And I think that the way they build players, long-term, as Geno either moves on or retires or, whatever happens there, then they have that kind of heir apparent for the future. Let's see. With the Texans officially saying they are out on Lamar, do the Hawks try and take a shot? No, I don't think they try and take a shot. Now, obviously, like I've said before, I do believe that there's probably a little bit of collusion behind the scenes, that the ownership is really not interested in a fully guaranteed contract that the Browns put out. I don't think they want that to become a precedent around the league, especially because when you look at the 3 fully guaranteed contracts for quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins got 2, and Deshaun obviously got that one 2 years ago, last year, whatever. None of them have equated to playoff wins. Certainly not even sniffing a Super Bowl ring. So it's tough from a financial standpoint to want to dump all this money into something that you really can't get out of. And at the end of the day, you're not winning rings. You're not even really winning playoff games. And so I think that is a situation where Lamar, not only does he have the disadvantage of he doesn't have an agent that I think in this particular scenario probably would have been helpful. I think it's a scenario where he was trying to save pennies and it's costing him dollars. But I think there's a lot of things in play, but the biggest one I think is, again, behind the scenes, I really don't believe that the owners want the transition to fully guaranteed contracts. I believe they kind of want to protect themselves from that. And it's unfortunate for Lamar because the guy deserves his payday, but, really leaning on that fully guaranteed part of it, I think that's really where he's coming up short and where he's probably getting pushback from the owners around the league. And, they're just going to put it off as the Browns did Browns things. But, if I was an owner and I'm looking at it, you have Cousins and Deshaun with guaranteed contracts over time, and none of them have produced rings. And there's one playoff win between those 3 contracts. So, I get why they don't want to do it. All right. Where would you rank the Seahawks D after Wagner's coming back? So they've actually added a lot of nice pieces, right? So the secondary of that defense is Pro Bowl guys. And so you got Diggs, you got Woolen, Neal. So you got some nice pieces. And then they added another safety. They've added some D-line. Obviously, Wagner's back. Jamal Adams comes back. So instead of being a 30th ranked D, I think they take a huge step forward. Now, they're not going to be elite, obviously, and we still have to see what it is they do in the draft. But I do think that they're probably going to be somewhere in that 12th to 15th ranked defense. And with as high powered as that offense is, that could get the job done. Like that is probably enough to win a couple more games, which is why I think the Hawks are a double-digit win team coming into this season. But that's kind of how I look at it. They're going to take a huge step forward. Again, it's not going to be an elite unit. We still do have to see what's in the draft, but that's kind of where I see them ending up. What do I think about the throwback jerseys this year? So I love that, right? I'm in my 40s. I watched them play in those jerseys originally. So I'm excited to see some throwback jerseys. It's going to be pretty cool to see their spin on it, right? Because they're never an exact replica. So it'll be fun to see, especially like the helmet. I'm not sure which jersey they're getting rid of because I believe they're only allowed to have 4 jerseys. So they can have the home, away, an alternate, and then their color rush or, whatever they call it. And so, they're not getting rid of the green ones. So I'm imagining they're getting rid of the gray for this coming season, which would make sense since the throwback jersey is silver anyway. But yeah, no, I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to buying a couple of throwback style jerseys. So that's one I'm excited about for sure. Let's see. Do you take a chance on Jonathan Mingo in the 4th or 5th round? Yeah, I could see that. He's not a super fast guy. I think he ran like a 4.46 or 4.47, something like that. So he's not a speedster, but he is tall. He's 6'2", 220, 225, something like that. So he's a bigger guy. But what it means is he's not going to create great separation. Everybody runs a 4.4 or faster at this point. So he's going to have to run extraordinarily clean routes. Now, if you could pick him up in the 5th round, sure. I mean, why not? They definitely have some questions. You got Lockett that's starting to get older. And so you do have to think about some guys filling in behind him. Obviously, Goodwin looked absolutely amazing filling in those spots whenever Lockett or DK wasn't available. So I do think they have that third option already on the team, but you got to keep that pipeline full. So if you could pick him up in the 5th round, that could be pretty cool. Again, he'd have to run some really nice routes. And admittedly, I did not watch a lot of Ole Miss football, so I didn't see a lot of tape on this guy. And I got this question this morning, so I also didn't get to watch any just to try and see what I would think. But again, I didn't watch a ton of Ole Miss, but again, bigger guy, has a nice vertical. So as long as he can run some really crisp routes to create separation that way, he could absolutely make sense in there. Do the Hawks try and go get Henry and Chubb? I don't think it makes sense for him. One, again, that's a cap issue, and salary cap wise, I don't know how you can pick up either one of those guys. The other thing is Walker was in line for rookie of the year, offensive rookie of the year. You also got to keep in mind that he missed, I believe it was 5 or 6 games, and he was still ranked 15th overall in the league in production, which is amazing considering you basically missed almost a third of the season. So I think they're really happy in what they have in Walker. And I think Walker will only get more productive as they fix some of that interior of the O-line to be able to get him a little bit better, gaps to run through. So I do think that they will probably not go after either one of those guys and stick with the running back room that they have. That's my guess, right? I mean, you have him on a rookie deal. He's as cheap as he's ever going to be. Super productive. So if you can fix a couple of the issues that we had in the interior line, I think he can be even better going into this next season. So no, I don't think you go after Henry or Chubb. I don't think it makes sense for this team. All right. Greatest Seahawks draft pick. Well, I mean, whether you like the guy or not, I feel like it has to be Wilson. You didn't have to get him in the first round or anything. The guy came to compete the whole time. I mean, every week he was there to compete. He did everything you kind of want your quarterback to do. Press conferences, he was the company man until the last, couple years. So I feel like your best draft pick probably had to be Wilson in that scenario. And, at the end of the day, they did get to 2 Super Bowls. They won 1. Now you can credit the defense for sure, but, he didn't make a ton of mistakes. So even if you were going to go with the idea that somehow he's the Trent Dilfer of the team, fine, but you still got a ring with him here. And so if he was that game manager that just got you over the top and whatever, if that's the way you look at it, cool. I think he was a little better than that. I mean, he did set just about every Seahawks passing record while he was there, statistical numbers across the board. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like there's an argument for a lot of guys, but at the end of the day, that one to me is probably the greatest one, simply because it's what got us over the top to finally get a championship in Seattle. So that's the way I look at it. Am I worried about an aging Lockett? So, I mean, as much as any aging football player, the one thing I'll give Lockett, though, which is a credit to him and a frustration at the same time, is he does the Doug Baldwin catch and hit the ground. So there's not a ton of yards after catch, but it also means he doesn't take the big hit. So he's going to have a longer career than, probably he would otherwise if he was, trying to break tackles and taking some of the bigger hits. So even though it is frustrating as a fan to watch him, do this cross route, catch the ball and hit the deck, when you're looking at the potential of him making a guy miss and taking it to the house, he also doesn't take those big hits. So he tends to be pretty durable, right? Because he's just not getting smashed all the time. So am I worried about it? No, I think where it becomes a question on Lockett is if he starts to lose speed, because some of that separation would then be harder for him to do, and it would open him up to start taking some more bigger hits. But again, I'm not worried about it, especially going into this particular season. You can only look at it one season at a time, really. So long term, yeah, I mean, he's an aging receiver and you're probably going to move off him. But going into this year, I think Lockett is still that perennial 1,000-yard receiver. And I mean, he's still your most productive guy. I mean, if the ball is near him, he brings it in. He's got super soft hands, makes really smart football plays. Also, knows how to manipulate a corner to be able to get open. So at the end of the day, I think he's probably still your number one threat. I mean, because you got DK, who's an absolute beast of an athlete, but doesn't necessarily always make the catches. So, I mean, that's one of those where your most productive, most just clutch guy is still Tyler Lockett. So, am I worried about him getting older? No more than any other, any other player in the NFL. Obviously, when you get older, the hits take longer to recover from. So, at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, they're going to have to start thinking about who's next. But they do have quite a few draft picks, so they may be looking at, some guys that are later, maybe a speed guy. But yeah, going into this year, Lockett's still your number one. Let's see. There was one that was sent to me a couple of minutes ago. Let me find it real quick. All right, so let's play this out. If Seattle listened to Russ, would have had to give up a first for Sean Payton, would be 3 years with no first round picks. Wouldn't have gotten our left tackle in the draft. 3 less picks. Wagner may not have left. And of course, the Russ extension. Now, that's sort of that's a huge question, right? Had he stayed, and man, I'm not sure. Like it'll play out in Denver. We'll get to see, but I feel like that Denver team is probably better than the Seahawks team would have been had he stayed. So if he would have stayed and they would have kept Wagner for what the Rams paid him, then they would have been in some very real cap trouble. I don't know that the rest of the team could have gotten better. Obviously, there would have been less picks. They wouldn't have had first round picks last year, this year, or next year. I don't see how you can build the team around him. I feel like you would have needed those draft picks to position the team to bring in a quarterback, similar to what Denver did do. I don't know that you can pay all that, lose those draft picks, because you just wouldn't have had the cap space to bring in free agent talent to fill those gaps. And I feel like you would have just really crippled your team in order to make that work. So I still think that moving on, I thought moving on was smart before, a year before we did it. But I think that moving on ultimately was better for the team because, again, they wouldn't have had draft picks. They wouldn't have been able to fix the O-line. I mean, it wasn't a scenario where there would have been any sustained success because they just didn't have the personnel anymore. I mean, that's actually why they brought Jamal Adams in, is it was like a desperation, plug a hole, hope it makes a huge splash. It didn't, obviously, but I didn't think one guy was going to do it anyway. I thought they gave up too much for Jamal Adams, but I understood why they did it, because they were trying to preserve what they were doing on the offensive side of the ball, and they just wanted a Band-Aid on a defense that was aging and, really not very good anymore. So I get why they did it. It didn't work. So moving on from him definitely made sense. Now, if Denver goes on to win a Super Bowl or something, obviously you can kind of try and second guess it, but you wouldn't have had those picks and you wouldn't have had the cap space to bring guys in. So you couldn't have built the team that Denver had at that point. So yeah, I don't really think that you could have done what you're asking, right? I don't think you could have made the team a viable option with Russ staying. Again, just because of the cap. I think that would have been the biggest struggle. All right. And there was one other one. Oh, no, I did answer that. All right. Okay, perfect. So yeah, that's all the questions I got from you for this week. I appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with me on a Blue Friday morning. Shout out to the Mariners starting out the season opening day, going 1-0 against the Guardians. Awesome to see the Mariners being productive and competitive. Again, I'm in my 40s, so I watched them when they had Griffey and everybody in the 90s, and then watched our 21-year drought. So great to see him in the playoffs last year, and hopefully they can build on it going through this season. But anyway, get ready for some more baseball, and obviously tune back in next Friday for Hawk Talk. Be sure to like, subscribe, and if you're watching on my channel, pop over to Let's Talk Sports as well and watch some of the other content. There's a lot of great guys over there. Also, you can check out the Hardcore Sports Network. Also, some great content on those channels. So other than that, take it easy. Enjoy your weekend, guys.